good evening, and welcome to our event on getting things done in digital policy. I'm very happy to see all of you here, and specifically welcome to our panel, our very own Professor Daniela Stockmann, who is leading the Center for Digital Governance and is also Professor of Digital Governance. And then we also have Frederik Blachetta, who is the first Chief Data Officer of the Federal German Chancellery. And then we also have Adriana Groh, who is the co-founder of the Sovereign Tech Fund, which we're going to hear more about today. And then we also have, to my right, Aline Blankertz, who is actually part of the public sector and politics team at Wikimedia Germany. So welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for being here. And here means at the Hertie School, specifically the Center for Digital Governance of the Hertie School. And yeah, today's discussion will really be about how to get things done in digital policy. So actually my first question to all of you is, we just talked about this already a little bit, and we actually ended up talking about dancing. I don't know where we'll end up here later, but how to get things done in digital policy? Do you have one keyword that you think of? Maybe Dani can start on the right side, and then everyone can contribute.
Sure. Is this working already? Yes, now it's working. Great. As we were talking about this amongst the panelists informally, our initial reaction, don't we all want to know how to get things done? But my keyword here would be a vision. Do you want me to expand right away?
Would be nice. Yeah, it's quite broad.
Okay, yes, that's very broad. As the students know, I'm looking at Europe from a Chinese perspective, because in my earlier life, I was working on digital governance in China. And so China is oftentimes used as an example of a very agile political system that is responding very flexibly and has moved from digital technology as a copycat towards being really innovative. And so in my work, what I find the secret sauce of the Chinese approach is to have a very clear vision of where at least in China, the central government wants to move. And what I personally am missing is Europe. In Europe, even though there is a European strategy, is a very clear, positive vision of how digital governance in democracy is supposed to look like.
Okay, then Frederik, what's your keyword?
Well, I think for everyone here, I think the microphone is also not yet working. I think for everyone here on stage, it is different things. Okay, now it's coming. So I think on stage here, it is a different angle for everyone. For me, it is a lot around getting things done in terms of really implementing stuff, really doing digitization on the ground, government digitization. And for me, if I would have to describe it in one hashtag, it would be choose the feasible. So do the stuff that you really can do now. Don't have a huge long-term plan. It will never succeed. It will never run, especially from my point of view in huge governments, because especially in Western countries, I think bureaucracy will not make it happen in the end. That's at least what I feel right now.
I have a background in public policy and governance, not in tech, and I started with democratic innovations, which is a different concept. But I found it interesting to apply this new digital tool set that we have to structures that we gave ourselves as a society, and then look how we can improve things so that they work better and we can actually get things done. And that's what brought me here, actually. And I still think it's very interesting to not think about digital, whatever that is, just this big word, but about what's not working now, why is it not working, and does digital provide a solution to make it work better? And if it doesn't, leave it out. But if it does, use it in a way that is really designed to improve stuff.
Well, I guess now it's my turn. I would, or the term I would refer to has to do with getting also getting the right things done in policy, not just getting, I mean, it's kind of stating the obvious. So not just getting anything done, not just being effective, but also doing what's important. And yes, democracy plays a big role here. And so I would refer to the term public interest or common good. It's kind of Gemeinwohl in German. So the public interest should be front and center, also in digital policy, because I think it's actually a lot harder to implement policy that is oriented towards the public interest as opposed to policies targeted towards economic growth. That's still kind of a lot of mainstream, a lot of interests are pushing in that direction. But yeah, what we want to do actually takes us down the slightly different road, which is why it's actually often a little bit harder to get it done.
Okay. Interesting insights and very different perspectives, I would say. So, Adriana, actually, I would really be interested in your point and also just what do you do for work at the Sovereign Tech Fund? Could you maybe just quickly, in short terms, explain to us what exactly the Sovereign Tech Fund is and what you do?
Okay, in quick words, the Sovereign Tech Fund invests in software infrastructure. That is, I always describe the software that developers need to develop software. So most of us who are no software developers will never come direct in touch with it. It has no interface for us per se. But every time we use software, it runs in the background. If it breaks, the stuff that we use does not work. And also, it is overlooked mostly. It's the roads and bridges of the internet. The analogy holds in that way that we probably also don't think about roads and bridges most of the time. But if there's road work ahead and we have to take a huge detour, or there's a bridge that's closed, then we really feel it in our everyday life. And the same goes for software infrastructure. As society, we understand that we need to invest in this physical infrastructure, like roads and bridges, at least in some parts of the world. And we do that every year. We don't discuss if we have to do it. We just say, we have to do it. How much money do we need this year? At the Sovereign Tech Fund, we believe we need to come to a similar understanding when it comes to software infrastructure, because it is underpinning all the goals we have, everything we do in economy, in society, in government. And with the Sovereign Tech Fund, and that's now what we do every day, we are trying to build up a new kind of public institution that uses public money. For now, could also evolve in the future, to invest in this software layer in the public interest. We started in 2023, and what time and year is it? Who am I? Like 1.5 years ago. We did a feasibility study before that. Time flies at the same time, and also we feel like we're doing this since 10 years. You probably know that feeling. And we're now just doing the investments. So we are scouting technologies, and then we're finding the right people, organizations, individuals even, and we give them the money to do important work so that we all can use the internet safely. In the future, we might do way more things, but maybe we have some time later to talk about this as well.
Of course. And one follow-up question, the word sovereign in Sovereign Tech Fund.
Yeah, good point.
What does that mean, and what's exactly behind that?
It's a big word, and it's also a contested word. It means different things in different parts of the world and to different people. We understand digital sovereignty as the independent and self-determined use of software. It comes with openness and co-creation and interoperability. It's not us against them, it's not protectionism, it's the exact opposite. So it's not what we hear when we talk about maybe the more traditional understanding of national sovereignty. Really, that's not how the internet works or should work, in our opinion. So that is our understanding of sovereignty.
Okay, interesting. And then I think Frederik also has one of the most interesting job descriptions and also a pretty new job title, I would say. Could you also tell us and give us a bit more or a few more insights on what exactly do you do for work?
Yeah, I will try to do that also quick and short. So basically, I think what governments throughout the globe saw during recent crises like COVID and others was that, yes, governments in most countries of the globe handled that crisis in their respective ways, and they came through fairly good overall in very general terms. I mean, we had some bad decision making, some good decision making, some would argue. But what most of the governments definitely saw was they were, especially with regards to their data management and their data analysis, in a situation where they were really passive and reactive in how they were able to respond and how they were able to react in certain terms. I mean, all of you, I think, especially in this room, but also watching this one, probably have their examples in their heads now at this moment. I see a lot of nodding at least. So coming from that situation, it was clear for German government that they would have to act. And I think the best and easiest way would be to build small competent teams in each of the ministries, somehow decentralized, but also coordinated and working together. And that's the moment where the structure of data labs was founded in the German government. So by now we have a CDO or a CDS, Chief Data Scientist or Chief Data Officer, in every ministry, the Chancellery, and the BPA, the Bundespresseamt, and each of those is working within their respective topics on data sciences on the one hand side, so working on use cases, data products, be it dashboards, be it ad hoc analysis for the respective leaders of the ministry, or in my case, the head of Chancellery and the Chancellor. Also, we are pushing forward all of the AI initiatives, or most of the AI initiatives. We have just been tasked as the Chancellery and the Ministry of Interior to together jointly coordinate the efforts for generative AI within the federal government and what to do in that areas. And of course, we are also working on, and that's the coordinating approach that we are also taking. So the Chancellery is also the coordinating ministry, or we are not a ministry, we are a house in very German legal terms, but maybe you can foresee me that failure. So we are coordinating all of the data labs across the ministries at the moment, which also includes, of course, to work upon data sharing. And this is really the hardest thing, like to break silos. I think everyone who's in general policy, but also in digital policy, in the moment you come to a point where you coordinate or really want them to work jointly and together, that's the moment where you really have to build a circle of trust. And I think that's also something very special about the data labs, that this circle is not the classic IT digitization circle being entrusted with their respective ITs for decades already by now, having a history, be positive or negative. But this circle, most of us is coming from outside into the government. And if someone is telling us, oh, you cannot share this data between this and that, we are like, why not? I mean, this is a Chancellery. They want to make good policy decisions. Why can't we share? And this is really something that we can, by our culture and by where we are coming from at the moment, move forward and together. And my role is to orchestrate all of that all together, which is working at some days very well and at some days not the best, but we are trying to improve every day and move that forward. I mean, the last part that I'm always missing on this, but it's not the least, is also something important to increase data competency across the workforce. I think this is something, a big work, because you have to imagine, especially at least from what I see now in the Chancellery, people there are rotating as policy workers into the Chancellery for 3 to 5 years for a term from their ministry, and they're normally working also on a topic for their ministry. And for some ministries, it's just 2 policy officers to coordinate all of the initiatives from one ministry. I mean, I leave it to you to imagine how that feels, you know. But it is at least long hours, and it's a lot of dedication, and it's working also, as I said, for the crisis response somehow. You know, it's not like totally failing. You know, So what we're trying to do there is also to give them the good tools at hand to improve that, to make them more flexible, to give them a chance to move that faster forward. I mean, a very easy one was for the chancellor. He always gets a paper, of course, and the high ministers, where they have a fact sheet of the country they are visiting. This was done manually. I mean, we took Shiny, and one of our data scientists helped them to co-work together with them and to automate that whole thing, and it's batching up daily. I mean, and don't ask me how complicated that was. That's a total other story, but these are the things that we are doing and moving forward. Sorry for the long one, yeah.
No, that was perfect. Also to hear some success stories in a way. That's exactly what we want to hear tonight. And I think Dani actually was really nodding when you talked about data sharing, because I think that's one very important aspect about academia, but also genuinely just doing research on platforms, but also specifically just in the digital policy area. So would like to ask you, data sharing, what does this mean? And especially when looking at the Digital Services Act and the possibility to maybe have more data as a researcher available for your research, what do you feel about this, or how is that exactly looking like?
Yeah, thank you for making that loop to the Digital Services Act, and also about this question of how can government and society improve collaborating with each other, because especially when we're thinking about the implementation of digital policies, one of the core motivations of policymakers in Europe for these new initiatives about how to regulate the digital platforms and also the digital search engines has been a knowledge gap between, on the one hand, the large, mostly US-based tech companies that know a lot, and on the other hand, public administrators, but also regulators and also citizens and the broader public knowing very little. And so in response to this problem, the European approach is trying to narrow the knowledge gap by providing access to data and kind of forcing tech companies to improve its transparency by providing different degrees of data access for researchers, both academic researchers, but also advocacy organizations. And currently we're in the process of implementing what's called Article 40 in the Digital Services Act. And so one of the things that at the Center for Digital Governance we're very active about is to help to coordinate the processes between, on the one hand, the public administrators who need to implement these legal obligations in the different member states in Europe, but on the other hand, also getting everybody on the same page and developing the kind of trust that Frederik was just talking about, to really understand the different ways of thinking about implementation of policy. Because from the sort of public administrator side, it's very much about articles and about what's written in the law and what this means. While from the researcher side, it's very much about the outcomes. So what does this mean? So how can we learn from the data about risks that are being posed for society, such as false information, manipulation of elections, and so forth. So we are, of course, we come with different kinds of mindsets to the same issue of data sharing. So it's mostly a question of getting people in the same room together, communicating, getting to understand the different processes and logics that are necessary from the different stakeholders' perspectives.
Then when looking at the process, but also the outcome, I think that's a good question for you, Aline, because you've really worked on, as you said, public interest in digital policy, and specifically also just, who participates in this? So who actually gets to have a seat at the table to be actively involved in digital policy? So what's your take on that? Is there anyone missing out in the conversation?
Well, I mean, this is really a case-by-case question, but that's, I mean, what I find really interesting about working at Wikimedia is that we, of course, we look at public policy kind of from the outside, but we also have a lot of projects, actual digital projects that we do internally, and where we actually have to walk the talk, as they say. Like, we also have to put it in practice. And participation is one of the areas where I must admit I learned the most, because I could see how important and how difficult it is to get kind of a large community to work together, to organize a lot of calls in different time zones, and becoming aware of all the obstacles people face. I mean, we know that there's still an underrepresentation of women, of marginalized communities. So we are thinking about what do we need to provide those people so they're better able to contribute. And the same holds true for digital policy. We know that it's still made mainly for those who are best at articulating their needs. And a lot of communities miss out. So we've had, for example, some interesting interactions with people from social welfare associations who have a very different perspective, going along the lines of what is actually the role of digital policy to improve social outcomes rather than somehow the other way around. And we've also had interactions with people, including young people in the process is very important, but it's not really how most of the game works. I mean, if you go to ministries, just this morning, I was at a stakeholder dialogue where there were basically 20 industry associations and it's kind of hard to believe that you get an outcome that's good for society at large if you look at these processes. So there is not one checklist you can go through to be like, oh yeah, now we've considered everyone, but it really depends on the question. But just kind of one high-level question that one can always ask is, are we including those who might be negatively affected, even though we might not really want to hear what they say, but we really should? And are we including those who are currently worst off, and then figure out what this policy does to them?
Yes, Adriana?
Because I wondered about this point when I thought about how to get things done. And then the most effective process, the fastest maybe, to get something done is not the best one, depending on what the quality of the outcome is supposed to be like, because participation is so tricky and it takes so long and it backfires quickly, because if you participate and have lots of stakeholders involved and everyone commits time and energy and thoughts, and then in the end the outcome doesn't reflect it, you shouldn't have done it in the first place, because there's nothing worse than doing all of that and then seeing no results. I personally, maybe unpopular opinion, believe then if you cannot do it in the right way, you should not do it at all, because the communities that are the most affected are often already overworked and overburdened with, well, tell us what you need. But if that doesn't lead to anything, and then you got something done, it's worth very little, in my opinion.
Especially when talking about participation. I mean, only in Germany there are so many policy initiatives on digital policy out there. There are projects on international level, on the EU level, on the federal level, even like municipal, and that's also, I think, what civil society often asks themselves, where should we participate? Like, the resources are also often limited. But then just talking about the industry associations that were at today's meeting at the ministry, I have a question for Frederik. I mean, you also already mentioned that you come from the private sector, and that's kind of also your background. Did you notice any difference between getting things done, not directly in policy, but also just in the digital sphere, between private and public sector?
Well, I mean, I think this is really a tricky one always. Not because there is a Captain Obvious that everyone will now hear, but rather because I think we sometimes misunderstand that government organizations are as kind of political organizations as big corporations are also sometimes. And they have as many layers and as many people who will have a say or be responsible for anything than in corporations. So the basic answer is, I think both can be burdensome and both can be full of troubles. But nevertheless, I think sometimes combined with a working culture and a tool support, IT tool support that is not on par in many ways. And I'm not talking about the leading edge, like on the very right side. I'm rather talking about something like in the average that will give you at least a certain kind of collaboration. I think yes, sometimes it is taking longer. It is it is more complicated. And this especially comes to a point when you have, for example, to work together with different ministries. Because especially in Germany, we have still the situation that every ministry is doing their own decision making. We call that Ressorthoheit, and it's a very high principle. So ressorts or ministries are in the end, of course, deciding on their own what they are using, what they are not using, and how they're working together and how they're not working together. And it is many times happening in this way that you are, from my point of view, coming to a consensual minimum only in the very end, also in regulation and in other areas sometimes. And I think this does not always mean that you get things right in the first place, from my point of view. Okay. No, it's not. It's coming back. So it's not like you can do it the right way, maybe in the first place. But I think this is a process that needs a lot of like good talks and open talks, like not this kind of deputy play that you sometimes do. You're talking about something, but not really like putting out the argument and not really doing the real stress test in that group. And I think this is the most important thing, to get faster to that point. And I think the system is not incentivizing that at the moment in many ways, and in some ways. I mean, and this also comes from the support of your top management. I mean, I feel totally enabled by the top management of the Chancellery. Like, they are really looking onto the things. They are really following through. They have a vision. They have a North Star that they want to have. And I discussed with them what could be the first measures to get there, to get things done. And they follow up on those. They're really coming back. They're asking, why it's not working? Why isn't it going forward? For example, we had a hardware installation, or we're still having that hardware installation, to be honest, at the moment going on in our house. And it's not working as fast as it could for various reasons. So I can give you 100 of those. I will not get into the particulars. But they're following up. They're asking, why is it not working? Why isn't it going forward? What is the problem at the moment? I can keep connected with them, talk with them, and they will help me get through the struggles sometimes, and also help and move things forward. And I think this is very important, that you come faster to the point, that you can close those points and then move forward and really make something done.
Danny, yes?
Yeah, I was just curious, Frederik, because I call the problem that you mentioned the lowest common denominator for a problem, which I think is maybe, I don't know to what extent it's really European, but I've also discovered it in other European contexts. And I was wondering, so one way that we are trying to overcome this issue for academic collaboration is by talking first about criteria or standards or principles to decide sort of the outcomes, or thinking about quality. Sort of how will you decide whether we will have high quality output? In your experience, can this overcome the lowest common denominator problem in some of the incidences that you faced?
I think yes, this could be a very good route to take. I think very important is also to maybe have a North Star or vision, or like something that you really want to have at some point, but not to plan already till that point. like a classic German thing, European thing, I would say, is somehow you say we want to have this this tower being built, and it has to be perfect. It has to be 135 stories high. It has to have a balcony. It has to have this kind of living room on this story and stuff. And you are really thinking this totally through. It is a 20-year working plan, with making that all implemented. And during that time, the standard of how a tower is being built could change. During that time, a supplier could fall out and stuff. But we are still doing this RFP with sometimes 3-digit millions of money being put in and stuff. And we don't know whether this company will exist in the very end or being taken over or whatever. I mean, we're talking about sovereignty also, so you never know what's happening next. So I think to really find the feasible phases of this, the feasible thing for a year maximum or 2 years in the highest, that is something that seems to me more achievable, at least from the experience that we had now in the data labs. I mean, in the data labs, it also comes into play. We are funded by EU Next Gen at the moment. So we are at the moment a temporary institution. So what we also had to do was to do value demonstration, which sometimes also means that you have to be quicker, which helps on one side that we just discussed. But also on the other hand side, you can ask yourself sometimes, I mean, you talked about the perfect or the right, getting things right in the first place. I would even say for us, I mean, sometimes we just had a study from Fraunhofer on the data laboratories, and they had one hypothesis which was saying sometimes maybe the data labs were not having already the sustainable outcome at hand at this very moment. And I was really thinking about this because it was a hard nugget for me as coordinating these organizations. But I would say, yes, maybe on some parts that is a good answer, and it's accurate, because we were at this moment also for ourselves, for each of the ministries, demonstrating our value in the first place. Because, of course, we are under the stress to show and indicate this is the value that you can get from a data lab as for each institution and also as a whole. So the next step definitely for us is to make it more professionalization on this part and make it more scalable also. And this means to be more sustainable and to work also on those topics.
It's just my role today. I'm going to add to what you say. No, but just that one remark, but I wanted to say something else about the right thing. I was more talking about the criteria and the values you apply. I'm a big fan of minimal viable product. So not this, we have this North Star and it needs to be the perfect rooftop terrace pool, or
It could be there at the end.
But exactly. So no, I totally agree. I just think when you talk about effectiveness and getting things done, the values and the criteria, it's super important. Otherwise, the outcome might be worth nothing. But I also totally agree with the step-by-step approach. And I just wanted to add that then we also need to be careful to not lose hope somewhere midway, because sometimes then with this step-by-step approach, it takes a little longer, which is fine, but then you're like, actually, it's nice here. This house is also fine. Do we actually need this house? And that's a danger just that I sometimes see. And it's a little dance between, we want this, but we're going to start here, and then we're going to end up there, and then there. And you really need good communications, good allies to not just lose sight halfway. That's what I wanted to add.
If I may briefly add to that as well, I think, or just to raise attention, because I think what a lot of civil society actors struggle with in the digital context, but apparently, I mean, also the data labs, is that there is some, what's the right balance between short-termism and long-termism? Yes, you can have a step-by-step approach, but how do you then not fall into the trap of, at each step, having to show something which might actually not be the best to build long-term capabilities? I don't really have the answer, but I think at the moment we are quite clearly erring on the side of short-termism, because, well, at least one indicator of that is that the government is saying, yeah, we really want to involve civil society, and we have these and that project. And a lot of civil society organizations are just no longer willing to engage with that, because they're like, yeah, another pilot project. So we're going to again show that something is possible, but not actually going to do it. So thank you. So, and that's really frustrating. And I mean, yeah, and then the government says, yeah, it's all agile and step by step like that. And so how do you bring those two together? I think for that you need somehow a longer term view, and also willingness to be transparent about where things stand. Because right now also, like, whatever is a pilot project needs to be sold as a big success, even if everybody knows kind of, yeah, we really expected something else to come out of this. So it's, again, also like, yeah, having these honest communication is really important. But yeah, I don't think it's the complete answer to where do we, or how do you reconcile short-term assessment and long-term success?
Speaking of pilot projects, Adriana, I have a question for you regarding, I mean, you ran a lot of successful pilot projects, so the Prototype Fund, or also the V versus Virus Hackathon, or now the Sovereign Tech Fund. How do you convince people? Because I think that's one important thing about getting projects and initiatives started. You actually have to have some people on board, and also, of course, resources. So speaking of money, how do you do that?
So this is, you remember the dance that was mentioned in the very beginning? Now we're coming. No, I was joking that there's a whole ritual and it involves very many steps and the dance. It does not. But the answer is of course, it's very tricky. I thought about this for a long time, and I was really kept me awake. I think we already mentioned the secret sauce a few times. You two did. It's trust. Super boring, but it's the thing that everything runs on. Well, I said that before about infrastructure, but honestly, it's trust, and it doesn't just apply to like politics or society topics. It's like also in businesses. I mean, we put all those institutions and laws and processes in place to kind of, but in the end, it's still trust. So you won't get things done just from now to then. You need a long process. You need to talk to many people. You need to participate yourself. You need to make room for participation. And then in a community and with a network, you will find the people at the right time for the right endeavor, for the right topic, to pull all strengths and powers together, and then you might be able to get something done. And it's a super non-answer, but I think that's the only answer I can give, because there's no step-by-step rule book, and then you're gonna do it, and then ta-da, there's always this soup that's cooking, and then luck, and then something's gonna happen. And on the way there, a lot of things will not happen. For one thing than to actually happen. Maybe to make it a bit more specific about the hackathon. And disclaimer, hackathons are community building instruments, learning exercises, sharing knowledge, having fun. Don't do it if you want to invent the wheel over and over again. We thought for the pandemic we had a good use case because we didn't really have one like recently. So maybe we needed some new solutions for this scale of crisis that we had. So we did it, and it really happened within a week. And that's exactly what I mean. A couple of people hit each other up on messengers and were like, "Do you think we can do something?" And they knew each other a long time before. And then they just did it, and because there was a group dynamic, more and more people joined, and then 40,000 people like said, hey, we're interested, and 20,000. Am I making up these numbers? No, those numbers are real, I think. 20,000 really participated, and it was just a huge event happening for lots of people who felt like frightened and stuck in an uncomfortable position. So it's really the spark that sometimes is needed, and then lots of people pouring all their time and energy into it, and that's it. Just that. I mean,
very
easy.
impressive. Sounds very hands-on and easy. So the right time, the right people, a little bit
right
of luck.
Topic,
Right topic.
Luck.
Okay.
Yeah.
Resources. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Then Aline, I mean, if you don't have all of that, failure, and you don't manage to convince people, what do we do out of this, especially in the digital policy space where the expectations and the visions are quite high, and you have this kind of like big goal? How do you deal with, or how do we deal with failure in this space?
First of all, I would say as I already said, we should be honest about it and not pretend that everything worked super smoothly. And I mean, that's what people are getting most frustrated about when it comes to government communication. Like, everything is a success. I haven't come across a single failure. And even when things were stopped, it's like, yeah, things were great. We're just no longer funding it, which is like, eh? And I think, so in this is just then a matter of training, because obviously the first time you communicate failure, it's hard. Then it will just get successively easier. And I mean, also because we have a community to, look after, is probably said too much, like the community, we are there to support and provide a framework in which they can effectively operate and have legal certainty and some functioning software and so on. And things don't always work out the way they should, but people call you out. And it's better to be credible and fail sometimes than to not be taken seriously, because then people stop actually believing anything. And then even when there is a success, or there is a more nuanced picture, people just don't listen anymore. And I think that's a pity and unnecessary.
I'm looking at Frederik because, I mean, you just called out the government on sometimes not being too open and honest about failing projects in the digital policy sphere. Do you have any thoughts on that criticism? Because you more work on the inside there.
I have some personal thoughts, but not in my capacity. I mean, I really had a good idea on the long versus short termism. What we can take, maybe something like good termism would be like a good average, like in the middle. Because I can really feel you from personal opinion. That from the outside there's only short or long-term projects in government at the moment, and both are running all very well. Especially the pilots. We have so many we can show you. I would agree on that basically, and I think especially to have that kind of learning culture is really important. I mean, we are doing, as data laboratories, we're doing regularly sessions on this in our teams, like within the Chancellery, but also in the interministerial working group that I'm leading. We are really trying to establish that on a regular basis and to learn from that. We are, for example, as I said, we did this value demonstration for quite some time now. During that time frame, we had not really a full overview of all of the use cases that all of the teams were doing. We have corrected this now. We are now looking into what is everyone doing. Is there maybe overlaps? Can we work together on those? I mean, especially everyone who worked and I think many in this room do with Python or R or anything similar. I mean, there is some routines and some standards that you can apply all together and have common standards, and it makes a lot of sense, especially if you want to like exchange those applications in the very end. So we are trying to establish this now more and more to make our work more efficient, but also learn more from each other. I think this is something that I can at least state here, and would also to throw in as from my role. But in general, I would really agree that, I mean, I can see this sometimes from our classic Vorlagenprozess in the Chancellery also. You know, you work such a long time between the different organizations till you have a consensus on this text then that you can then send it. But you will not send a dissent normally, you know, so you're working very long hours and it's taking a lot of time to put that together. Sometimes this makes lots of sense. I would say in 99% it makes lots of sense because it's good that you have a bottom-up process in the very end. But if this means that you come to the lowest denominator, I would argue stop it at some point. You know, someone has to stay there and make their point, you know, and to say, no, this is not what I want. This is not successful. If we would do it this way, it would be just a thing, just another project that you and the other civil society groups could look at afterwards, of course, also, and just say, wow, hey, okay, can we now look into the process or how it has been built up there? I think this is really something that we have to work on, at least from my personal view.
Thank you very much also for that honest answer. And then, Dani, one question for you on more of the geopolitical environment, because in digital policy, we can't only look on the inside, but also we have to know what the others do, especially also in the context of the Sovereign Tech Fund. It was, I mean, I would say fun, like basically it's funded because there is a lot of infrastructure that actually belongs to other stakeholders, especially geopolitical actors like China or the US. So yeah, in this geopolitical environment, a lot of initiatives are doomed to fail sometimes, if one may say. How does one navigate this, and which role, especially in your research, does China play in this, and what should be on the radar of policymakers, digital policymakers in Germany?
Woo, if I had an answer to this question, I think this is a $1 million answer. But I can, I think in light of the discussion about decoupling from China, about there's a discussion, of course, about digital sovereignty. Yesterday we had Julia Pohle come and talk to us about European understandings of digital sovereignty. And in general, as a sort of broader trend, I would say that we have moved from an age where the internet was mainly governed at the UN level, sort of at the international level. If you think about ICANN and so forth, now towards a state where this sort of the nation state is coming back, especially when we think about regulation of platforms and content. And so, Anu Bradford has this book out called Digital Empires, where she talks about the US model and the Chinese model being at two sides of the spectrum, and then the Europe somewhere in the middle, and French President Emmanuel Macron, but also the German Bundespräsident Frank-Walter Steinmeier, they have also used this comparison between the US, Europe, and China in the discussions. And of course, as we are thinking about these different models, then there is always a question of sort of whose technology do we adopt, to what extent do we need to build our own European capacities, especially when it comes to technology that is important for security and national security. So I always take the position that we should not be adopting policies by the origin of the state that creates the technology, but we should be developing standards to assess whether a specific technological solution is protecting privacy, is and having other principles, other criteria to evaluate specific technological solutions. So I tend to have the position that we should not politicize this space too much, but increasingly in the policy discussion, this is becoming very challenging.
And Adriana, in what ways are you maybe also in exchange with stakeholders from other countries and just in international digital policy dialogue? How are you involved there?
Exactly because of the definition we have of digital sovereignty, that it's not us against them, it's not just one geographic area. The Sovereign Tech Fund supports internationally. So we're looking from this public interest perspective at software infrastructure, and then we're making investments. We're then looking, okay, who's using that, and we're always trying to have this horizontal approach. So it shouldn't just benefit one actor or even just one set of actors. It should be really, cross-cutting. And honestly, in our field, the problem is exactly that no one owns it. No one takes responsibility for it. We have a classic tragedy of the commons here. Everyone needs it, everyone uses it, no one feels responsible. I think you can call it a market failure. So that's also why businesses have to take up more responsibility, but we believe they shouldn't be the only ones, because they're not representing like the public's interest. So, and they can also change their business strategy, and then a piece of software that is also very critical for civil society activities is totally abandoned. So what I'm saying is we're talking to all sorts of actors everywhere to make sure that this global digital common, so to say, is in a well-maintained situation and will remain so that all of us can use it for their respective goals and activities. That's the theory. Putting that into practice, we're also exploring and learning. For now, we found a good angle, but also to make this more sustainable. So spending money once will not fix structural problems on the long term. We are thinking about more and more mechanisms to achieve this. And maybe I want to add one thought about the getting things done, because I was like, oh my God, this was so disencouraging. You need this and that and this. But that's actually, I think you can flip it the other way around and say, there's always an opportunity. You will always find people who are happy to join a project and to try to push things forward, to improve things. And they will sometimes fail, but sometimes they will be a success. So I would like to have it understood in a way that you can always try, there's always the next one and the new opportunity, and you will always find your people to do something that you care about, and not like, okay, I cannot do this is too much.
That's actually very encouraging, I think, for all of us. So I have one final question for all of you. Maybe we can do a small last round. Well, mainly policy students or data science students. What are like the tips, or what's the advice that you will or would give to someone who kind of wants to get a foot into the door when it comes to digital policy in a way? And what kind of advice would you maybe give to your younger self, or just a young person at the moment, a student who is kind of like, starting off in this environment? Maybe we can start with Aline.
Easy question. I mean, that's hard. Because there's one piece of advice that I'm a little bit reluctant to give. Because I'm not sure it's the best advice, but it's something that worked in my case. I mean, I started out, I'm an economist by training, and I started out in a consultancy and actually spent still so far the largest chunk of my working life there. And I learned a lot in kind of a project-based environment, kind of working on different projects and getting insights into somewhat different sectors. So there was a lot of kind of trying out involved, and I never had kind of a long-term vision. And then I kind of, at some point I was like, okay, this doesn't really feel right anymore. I have learned what I wanted to learn, and now I want to be more convinced by the objectives that the work I do support. So only then I kind of changed sides, if you wish. And I also recently spoke to some people who were finishing their studies, were like, oh, should we join public administration or go into consultancy? And yeah, I don't know. I still believe kind of learning, and in the beginning also being open to different perspectives can help to understand why certain perspectives might not work for you. I'm sorry, this is extremely generic, but it's the best
good advice.
I can do for now.
Very honest. And Adriana?
No, I also think it's a good advice. I think mine is a little in that direction as well. Mine's actually very cheesy, but one person once said that to me, and it gave me lots of confidence, because someone once said to me, you're really enthusiastic about topics, and that will get you to places. And I think that's really true. If you find the things you're really enthusiastic about, you will have the energy, and you will have what it takes to convince people to also be enthusiastic about this. And I think sometimes that's like 2/3 of what you need. So really, when you care and when you want to work in this, you will find the right words and find the right people, and then you do it step by step. There it is again. But yeah, just find what you care about, and then don't be ashamed to be really enthusiastic about it. It works. At least it did for me.
Well, I think it's hard to say like the best advice. I agree totally. Can liaise with you. I think yes, consultancy has a good pro to start with, because you get a good general set of capabilities somehow. I would agree on that. But I would also say, like, many times consultancies also, like, unfortunately take away the big potentials, because people are then getting too deep into it and they are already up the pyramid and they don't leave anymore. I mean, I needed to get to the level of partnership to get out, but I had to go there somehow for myself also, I think. But that was a very good moment for me to reflect and to think about, even if I would at some point go back into consultancy, now having already been worked on the public side, I really have the feeling that when I would come back, and really not coming up soon, I would have the feeling that I can now have a better dialogue with them. So maybe my advice would be a little bit in your direction, but if sometimes you're putting like this stakeholder also in some groups, like public, private, civil society, academia, that's like the most common classification on those. I think try to at least during your internships and during your assignments in the beginning to see as many of those groups as possible. Because I think it's a very good thing to have these different angles already, to know which one would be a good way to start for you, and where you would feel the best in your way, where you would think, I have the best personal impact. For example, my mission to digitize government and society really built up during my career. I wasn't staying there on the first day at back then it was a financial service consultancy. I was not staying there and saying, this is like my mission I want to follow, but by now I have it, and I'm really following that through. And I'm willing to work on that. And I think this is important. And I think the most important advice in kind of how you act, and I really love that one. I always have 3 of them for young professionals, but I will give you only one. Stay strong on your argument, on your position. Like, don't forfight too easy, but also don't push too hard. At some point, a team will make a decision, or your superior will make a decision, depending on the culture where you're working at that moment of time. And then you have to follow through as a team, of course. That's also a very important aspect, I think. But stay real, stay true, and say, no, I don't think this is the right way. This is the lowest denominator. Please don't do that, because I have X, Y, that, yada, yada. If you give those answers and you give them like you shouldn't be the one that is always in the opposition, but you should be the one that is making their point and following through and having an opinion that they're really having for the whole career or at least their term, like in a project or in an engagement. I think that's very important. Try to stay on that side.
And I would add to this, one of the core insights that I had moving from sort of the academic discussion more into the policy sphere has been that I previously underestimated how important social networks are in policy making. And so when we talk about trust and finding the right people and so forth, all of this is just enabled because you get to know the people who are interested in the same issues. And of course, when you start out, you don't know them because you're just starting out. And chances are in the beginning you don't meet that many people who are exactly critical within that social network. So my advice would be when you start out, don't be afraid of just directly approaching people, emailing them, getting to know people, even though you don't know them yet. And don't mind if people in the beginning may not answer. Just give it a try, find other ways, see them at conferences, introduce yourself. Don't be discouraged in the beginning. You will eventually find a bunch of people that really are enthusiastic about what you do. And don't underestimate how powerful genuine interest it is. I think if you are really genuinely interested and enthusiastic about a topic, you will eventually succeed in building the trust and finding the right collaborators to work with.
Thank you very much for the amazing advice for all of you, and also genuinely for the fantastic panel. I'm very sure that there are more questions in our audience, so Paul is going to go around with the microphone. You can just raise your hand if you want to ask a question. I'm seeing someone there.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Fine. Thank you for your time. I think my question's for Adriana. Given the fact that traditional metrics, it's difficult to use traditional metrics to assess the impact of open source technologies. How do you assess the impact of Sovereign Tech Fund? How have you done it so far, and what is the kind of vision for the future? Thanks.
Yeah, I think we're just going to directly respond.
So this is one of the areas that we're also still working on. We're having margins of like a couple of million things because stuff is downloaded a million times. So numbers like quantitatively become very quickly very arbitrary because it just explodes. So right now we're doing it qualitatively, and we're working on the metrics to do it qualitatively and quantitatively, because I think you need always both to have a full picture, and just one side will never give you the complete answer. So we don't have the complete answer yet. The qualitative interviews that we're doing tell us that the culture of the communities or the maintainers slightly but significantly changes as soon as they get this kind of when they get public money and they get also this, you do something that is of public value and we see it and we want to contract you to do this work in the public's interest. That is something that they really miss because it's often just completely overlooked. So that is just a qualitative thing, but it really changes something. And another example is that senior maintainers kept on working without pay, but they brought in junior maintainers, which of course also has an impact for when the funding's gone, how the project is situated, because then there are more people who know how to maintain this critical piece of software. So it sounds really little and small, but it is a cultural or like a structural nudge towards the right direction, and we keep on trying to do that. And also, as I said, the quantitative metrics, that's a really tough one, but we're also working on that, and we're gonna work open source ourselves, so we're gonna share all of that, also the things that don't work, and not just the things that work, so that others can learn from it. And the Sovereign Tech Fund is still the very first instrument that does exactly what we're doing with this kind of conviction that we're having. So we really hope that we can provide some knowledge to the field so others can follow suit.
thank you for the great panel. I have a question that came to me spontaneously when you named the stakeholders, because we're talking about digital policy, and you didn't name the technical community, and it kind of fits because it's also not represented on the panel. So my question is for all of you, in your work, in your advocacy, how do you engage with the technical community? Is like the adults are talking, and when it comes to implementation, they come into play. I mean, it's probably different for all of you, but how do you engage with the technical community in your jobs?
Who would you define as a technical community? Just a short backup that I don't miss something here.
So the computer scientists,
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, we have computer scientists in our team. So they are part of our team. In the sectors that I just mentioned, they could be in all of them because it's rather a capability than a sector by itself. So it could be private, it could be public, it could be civil society, it could be, from my point of view, it could also be academia. I mean, it comes from how that community is organized, or that person, that individual, or the organization they're working for, from my point of view. So for us, they're working within our team. Of course, we are working a lot together with suppliers also, be it on the one hand side, suppliers for tools themselves, or suppliers for the implementation themselves, or for the development. Yeah, I mean, the queue is always very long. I really wanted to emphasize what you just said as your career advice, to talk to people. Like I had on one conference a few months back, there was a long queue with, I think, 10 people who wanted to talk to me. And it was many suppliers in there, to be honest. And it was burdensome at some point because everyone is having that one elevator pitch. And I have that big data organization suite for you that will solve all of the problems of the whole of government. I was like, okay, thank you very much. Then there was the next one and I mean, then there was a student here of the Hertie School coming to me, or a group of them. And that was really the moment that was, at least for me, making my day more than anyone else in that queue, because they had a genuine interest. They wanted to talk to me because they really liked what I was talking about. They were even thinking about those topics already in class and stuff. And that was really like giving me more wings on that day than any other conversation that I had, So I can only emphasize that, not only for the policy workers, but also for the one from the tech community, computer scientists, and everyone who have a genuine interest on the topic and not just on their commercial sell or whatever comes into their mind. I mean, yes, if everything fits together, I'm happy to also get to know about that one suite that I didn't know yet. Yeah, exactly. But till then, I think these genuine interests are even more important. So I just wanted to say that also.
I am so glad that the Hertie schools made such a strong impression on Frederik. Go Hertie! But no, I was going to say that in the field that I work on, which is platform regulation, there's a fair amount of bashing going on regarding the big US-based tech companies. Obviously, X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and so forth. So there is in these social networks, there have to be safe spaces where even the tech developers that are working, or even computer scientists also that are working on solutions that are aimed at regulating these big tech companies, that they feel safe to a certain extent. But then we also have separate events where it's really about engaging them, because we all know that we can't do it without them. Because ultimately, they're the ones who know how they work internally, and so you cannot impose solutions on them that don't work in practice. So you have to find ways to work together. And a lot of the times, to be honest, talking to them, they do have really good points too, of why they can't do certain things. So I think the way that we resolve it when we build transnational networks between the US and Europe, it's really about creating different kinds of format amongst different kinds of people, and then emphasizing different elements in the discussion.
Adriana and Aline, do you also want to respond to that question?
I can briefly. I mean, there are two levels. One is we provide software. We have a software development department, and which also has various contributors because it's open source. So it's there are ping pony sessions where people can come with requests, and kind of then Wikimedia as an organization assesses that. Within my team, the policy team, we do have technical expertise. I also talk to academia. I mean, I've worked with data in the past, which is sometimes at least helpful to not be completely gaslighted. And that's actually important in discussions, with those the big commercial players in that space. When I sit in discussions with Apple and others, and they go like, oh yeah, and for privacy, we're doing this and that. And that's why I'm sorry, it's not possible to have competition or interoperability. Or they go, yeah, and we're doing this. And it's just that people are not choosing. They don't really want what you say is your policy demand. And I do need to have the technical understanding of what we are asking for. So it's really important that we have sound policy recommendations also from a technical perspective.
I think in our case it's really easy. The Sovereign Tech Fund just exists for software developer communities. But maybe just one thing to add, because you asked, and technical communities are also very diverse. So even in our case, speaking to people who are mainly doing civic tech projects, or people who are maintainers, is a big difference. So you really need to understand your audience in order to be able to involve them in the right way and ask the right questions, and not frustrate people.
I think we had one question over there.
Yeah, two questions actually, if I may. So the first question would be that how do you see like general project management and management tools related to getting things done in like digital policy? Because for instance, I think British government, they like brought a white paper where they said, okay, we're going to structure contracting and actually like outside firms differently. So for them to have a different incentivizing to actually deliver on the projects that they do on time. For instance, that they said, okay, if you manage on the date you gave us to actually deliver the project, you're gonna get like a bonus, or for every like week that you prolong it, like you will have to actually have a reduction of the fee that we pay you, which for them worked quite beautifully from the first like pilot stuff that they did, I guess. So I was wondering about this. And then secondly, maybe also for the Sovereign Tech Fund, how do you make sure that people don't change what they say they need just because they think that you would be more willing to pay for it if they would frame it in a certain way?
Adriana, you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. So when we go out and scout for technologies, software infrastructure in the public interest, we identify a piece of software first, and then we start a conversation with sometimes a single maintainer, sometimes a loose community, sometimes a company to commission work. And we don't want to do that mistake where we just tell them, your work is important, please now do ABC, because that is silly. So we say, your work is important, and we think this area particular, but now let's have a conversation and you explain to us what is the thing that needs to be done first and foremost, and how you would do it. So we do something like a milestone-based contract, and the people who work at the Sovereign Tech Fund have the expertise of technology and the work that is needed to judge this conversation. But it's still a conversation where we get lots of input from the maintainers. They do that work since, I don't know, 10 years, 15 years maybe even. So it would be silly to not listen first and then go into a contracting phase. And that's also how we make sure that they are not just, trying to please us, because then it would be wasting taxpayers' money, basically, if we wouldn't listen to their expertise first.
Does anyone want to take the first question?
I don't know. I mean, there were many governments that were having these kind of standards. I think one of the very good practices is UK with GDS, who was having a whole tool set for that, like a whole toolbox, which was very, I think, very deep and very differentiated. I mean, I cannot, as my term is not that long, I will speak rather of my consulting background and what I saw in different governments throughout Europe and Middle East. I would definitely say standards are a good thing, and if you follow a standard, it's a good thing, but it can also give you a blended reality. What do I mean by that? If you have one of those 157-story houses project that is going on for a decade or many, many years, and you have a certain standard, and you have like externalized nearly all of the workforce working on that project, and they are following this approach, and by that approach, they have to deliver this kind of report at that kind of date with this kind of font and this kind of size, and it has to be in this kind of way. And everyone is fine because practically at every of the dates that you have acknowledged and that you have done in the standard, it looked perfectly fine for the people inside, which were not many, and which were not having the competencies and the capabilities to really see through this blended reality and to look into where's the project really standing. Like, are they really building the application that I wanted? Or are they just implying that they are building the application that I wanted and they are spending and burning, having a burn rate of many millions or whatever. So I would argue it is a combination of factors, and I would rather argue for internalization of good capabilities and good experts, which is even harder for most of governments that I saw and now know also one from the inside. Because I think that you really have to have those internal knowledge base and those people from the inside who can then really see on a project. And then you don't have to argue about the standard itself, but rather what you negotiate together on this project and these aspects. And I wouldn't say no to that. I mean, also I think German government has 2 or 3 standards for project management, for example. And then there's always in this RFP, it is always saying, you have this standard or similar. That's always what they're then asking for on the different profiles. And this makes it extremely difficult at some cases. So I would say have more competent people internally who can really judge on whether a project is running good or not, rather than having too many external people working on a common standard that is not giving you a see-through.
We still have time for one last question.
I just wanted to say 100%. I think this is one of the key points that civil society cannot re-emphasize often enough. That having more internal capabilities in government is really important. Yes, standards can help, and having certain practices of making stuff open source, implementing certain clauses in procurement is helpful. But yeah, nice.
All right. Thank you very much to the panel for your insights. And I learned today that people are actually one of the most important things to get things done in digital policies. And I would mainly direct my question to you, Frederik. Is this actually working?
Yeah, it is on. I was really
is it on? Can you hear me? So how are you building culture in the Federal Chancellery, in our government? How do you achieve that a vision among who actually? Who has to have a vision in our government? And how do you make it last? How do you make it last for longer than one electoral period?
And see you later. Let's say in an hour.
So maybe just what do you do?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And actually, you really make me think now even harder, because in the morning I had a Lego serious play workshop with my team, and one of the things was exactly on that. I had to make my superpowers in a Lego Duplo design, and to show that to my team. I will not tell you everything, but maybe I can give you at least some parts what I saw there. So for me, always personally, it is to build a platform for my team where they can work self-determined and decision-making abled to a point they need to have it on their own, and to give them a kind of, I wouldn't call it a paradise, but a good platform and a good environment. What I did in the morning, I made, for example, I had some plans that I put in and a nice team, and everyone was like high-fiving, and everyone was like wearing whatever they need on accessories. I mean, we had like archery and swords, and we had I guess like an air tank from a diver and stuff, and helmets. So I put that on each of the team. So what I always try to do in teams and to build high-performing teams is to give them a platform and to let them work on their own. And I have certain routines that I go through with them. But I will always stay in. If one of them is doing a mistake, it will be a mistake of myself in my team. And I will always stay there and take whatever comes to me. And I think the most important part for me personally is always to stay calm in those situations. I had some rough storms already. But first of all, analyze, see what is really happening, what is the situation, what are the different key people saying to this situation, and how can you react on this? I think this is the most important part. And for your second part, which was more on what is the outer environment of this, I think it is very important to have top management, which is really also wanting you to do what you do, and that you have the alignment with them. For me personally, it means we have a little, very small working program. I think I could even sketch it on one page, and we have like one project for each of the boxes in there, and we are following those projects, and we are informing regularly the head of the Chancellery on the status of these projects, and we're getting feedback from him and the organization on how to proceed, or having a Rücksprache, so a meetup together with him to discuss this through. And I think this is really important to have really that backup. And because sometimes you're sitting in a room with all of those ministries, data laboratories, and they're telling you like, okay, it's nice, Frederik, that you have that opinion. Why should we do that? And if you're sitting there like, it is the right thing to do, they will look at you and they will be like, okay, thank you. Sometimes you need those authorities also to say, it is a task of the head of the Federal Chancellery, and he said that in the State Secretary round for digital policy, so please could we maybe think about it? It makes it easier sometimes. I wouldn't say it moves things always quickly, but it makes it easier. So I think this alignment is important. And you have to... you should not too much, you have to focus your attention. Sometimes you're spread, especially in this digital policy space, and this is really, for me, it's bothersome sometimes, because I would love to work more, have more dialogue with civil society. We are doing this now partially, and with some organizations already. We haven't talked to you yet. We were trying to establish that, so I think I can make this public, so we will do that hopefully afterwards, and now find a date to meet up, because we really want to do that. But this also comes from the point, also from the temporary short-termism that we are yet in, that we had to focus on demonstrating our values, and we wanted to do that. And I think now coming to a place where hopefully in the next budget we will be instated for a longer term, we will definitely work also on these parts, which will not lessen our focus, but make it more sustainable and move that forward. Thank you for that question.
Thank you very much to the entire panel. Maybe one small round of applause for... And also thank you very much to the Center for Digital Governance, so especially Maite and Joanne, for making this possible, and especially also to the Student Advisory Board who hosted this event. So shout out to Paul, he's the mind behind this entire panel. And just a very small advertisement block. Exactly in 1 week at 6 p.m. we're going to have an event on the Global Digital Compact, which is going to be online via Teams, so you're warmly invited to this event and to join us to discuss global digital policy there. And otherwise, snacks and drinks are provided over there. And thank you very much for attending today's event.